Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me today in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and, oh yeah, that sometimes messy thing that we call life. This podcast, it's brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com. All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining us for yet another episode. And I'm joined by yet another new friend, Joe Dantone. Thank you so much, Joe, for making time for the Bokeh Podcast today.
Hey, definitely. Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
Well, and I want to start off in a little bit of an unusual way. I don't normally do this for our podcast episodes, but I was quite taken by a segment of text on the About section, or what most photographers probably know as an About section on your website at Joe, J-O-E, Dantone, D-A-N-T-O-N-E.com. You have a section called Who I Am. And I have to read this to get us started because I was drawn in when I read it. You said, after 2 years of dabbling in wedding photography while working full-time at BMW, I realized I needed a change in my life. I wanted to be happy. That meant doing photography full-time. I promised my wife that one day soon, I wanted to wake up with her and my newborn son on a Monday morning and be able to go and grab a cup of coffee and sit with my little family instead of going to work as a technician. The only way this would happen was if I made this change. Lucky for me, I have an incredible wife who supports everything and anything I do. I knew I could make this happen. My son was 60 days old the day I walked into my boss's office and quit my job. It was May 17th, a Friday. I had my first wedding as a full-time Philadelphia wedding photographer on that Saturday. Guess what I did on Monday? I woke up with my wife and son next to me, big smiles, and had that cup of coffee. I'm doing what I love. And that's capturing memories of my couples that will last a lifetime. Thank you for taking the time to read about my journey. I can't wait to document yours. And I mean, I'm getting emotional reading that because what you described there, it just so encapsulates, my goal for certainly my life and my family life, my life as a business owner, but ultimately what so much of Bokeh Podcast is about, which is to encourage photographers to create a little bit of space and time in their life for that moment that you just described, and Photographers Edit for that matter. We give photographers time back in their lives by handling a time-consuming thing like editing so that they can focus on those important relationships in their lives. And so I had to start by reading that. It's extremely touching, and I really appreciate you sharing that. What comes to mind as I'm reading that?
It really gave me the chills because, to be honest, I used to read that a lot because it was just inspiring for me, to understand why I got into this and, the things that I love about it. But yeah, reading that every once in a while kind of like shifts me back to where I need to be. Now having two boys, free time, and being able to do those things is a little bit more difficult now.
Yeah.
With schedules, with me and the wife, opposite schedules and trying to make it happen. But I do believe that you really need to put time away and just be able to enjoy those things. And yeah, I mean, I was always in creative industry one way or another. I did music all my life. And, I always kind of had a passion for cars, but I always look back at it now that I'm doing weddings full time and photography full time. I always look back and I'm like, I think working on cars and being in that industry was kind of like my placeholder until I found, the right spot that I wanted to be in.
Well, I mean, this is a good segue, though, too, to my normal first question, which is, despite having two kids and a busy life, and your wife, you said, kind of works an opposite schedule, how do you create that time, to chill out in bed, have some coffee and hang out with your family or whatever it might be? How do you create that space for yourself, even if it's for a half hour or an hour here and there during your work week?
So I guess the time for myself has become extremely limited just because I'm like a workhorse. So any downtime that I have, I always, if it's not with family, I'm trying to put it back into the business.
Fair enough.
So a big thing for me is, I have a couple of friends that are in the industry, not photographers, but DJs, things like that, that are really, they're like 3-4 miles from my house. I have a really close friend of mine. His name's Pat, and we'll meet up and grab a coffee first thing in the morning, kind of hang out for a half hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll split our ways and, do our thing. So it kind of gives me the time to kind of decompress and just get ready for the workday. And, as far as setting my days up, I don't do this as much as I should, but I kind of have a plan for myself the night before, the things I need to finish for the day. And it kind of gives me an outline. I have really bad ADHD, and I don't take any medicine or anything. I just kind of have all these systems in place to make it work. And that seems to work for me. So, but as far as everything with family, me and my wife, we have off, days like Mondays and Fridays, we have off together. So we try to put one of those days away just for family time.
That's cool.
And do that. So yeah, it's, trying to figure this year out is a little difficult because my son Lorenzo, he's in kindergarten and they do partial day kindergarten here. So it starts in the middle of the day. So it's a little difficult this year, but next year should be a lot easier.
You mentioned Mondays off, and I've talked about this in the podcast before, but we used to do something before my kids got into school called Fun Monday. And so, we'd shoot a wedding on the weekend, and then come Monday, the computers get shut down, and it was time to hang out with the kids and to give them that focused time. And, the cool thing too about creating that expectation with your kids is then they kind of hold you accountable.
Right.
And they're like, hey, it's Fun Monday. Why is your computer open kind of thing? They can do that for you. But again, I love that you prioritize that. And this is a good reminder and inspiration ultimately for all of us to make sure that even if it's for 5, 10, 15 minutes where we get to sit and have that time with the significant people in our life, I get it. Like we all have to make a living. We have certain goals, financial goals that we want to achieve that go beyond just paying the bills. And we, hopefully, most of us anyway, enjoy what we do as well. But there's really nothing that can replace human connection, and not the human connection that we're getting through, typing a DM on Instagram, but like an in-person human connection. And we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. So I appreciate you kind of setting that standard for us and setting the stage for the conversation. Talk to me about one of the most impactful books that you've had the opportunity to read.
So I don't really read.
Fair enough.
I guess I can't keep focused long enough to actually get through a book. I love collecting them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's cool books that come out. I'm like, yeah, I'll read this and get through a couple chapters. And then I'm like, all right, I have some other stuff to do, and then I'll totally forget about it. But as far as, I guess, content that's impactful, not just reading, but yeah, I do listen to, podcasts, people that inspire me. Chase Jarvis is big, Pi, and just kind of like surrounding myself with people that inspire me and kind of push me to move further and to learn things. And, I feel like if I have people around me that are more advanced or know more than I do in specific areas, it's always a good learning opportunity for myself. Yeah. So I really try to just do that. And, books really aren't my thing.
That's
I used
fair.
to read here and there, but as far as that goes, I just try to follow people that inspire me and keep on the grind. Well,
and you actually bring up a really interesting point. And I think maybe after our conversation today, I'm going to have to rephrase or reword that question, because the reality is we're lucky enough to be in 2019 where we can consume content through a variety of mediums or platforms.
Right.
And you also pointed something out earlier, and I don't want to get too deep in this topic because I know it's loaded and there are various perspectives, but you mentioned ADD and how rather than in your case taking medicine, you've kind of adjusted your life to understanding your tendencies, set yourself up for the best success possible, basically. And, if you understand, hey, I don't have the easiest time paying attention or focusing on a book, then maybe listening to a podcast as I'm driving is going to be a more effective method of consuming content. That's great. There's some self-awareness there, and you're making an adjustment and accommodating that rather than spending an excessive amount of time trying to change that. I mean, we could go both ways, but in this case, I just love the fact that you kind of flex and go with it. And again, we highlight the point that it doesn't have to be sitting and reading a physical book that actually enables us to learn. There are so many incredible sources of content. I mean, I was just listening as I was getting ready just a little bit earlier to some content by Gary Vaynerchuk. We talk about Gary a lot on the podcast.
He's awesome.
And he is great for multiple reasons, but it's, you can turn on a podcast or watch a YouTube video. I did both this morning and listen to some content, whether it's inspiration or, for me, I think at this point, in some cases anyway, it's more of a reminder. Like I know the principles that he's talking about. It's just a good reminder, a kick in the butt to, hey, you need to actually go do the thing, which is a good segue to the most important point here, really ultimately, is that if we're actually consuming content at all, that we actually then go do something about it. Because it's one thing to read and say, you hear people that talk about reading 50 books a year or listening to 50 books a year, 100 books a year. And I still wonder, what are you actually doing with that content? What percentage of that content are you actually applying?
Right.
And so anyway, go do. And I like that. I like the approach that you've taken to it. And I'm definitely going to have to adjust that question for future interviews. You make a great point. Let's go to the next question, though. What, from all that you've learned thus far as a business owner, and by the way, how long total have you been in business as a photographer?
So as a full-time, I just finished up my 5th year. So I'm rolling into my 6th year this year.
That's great. That's wonderful. So within that time frame, then, what would you say has been the most important lesson that you've learned that you would just be very quick to share with a fellow photographer?
So I guess the biggest thing, and it was advice that was given to me well before I even got into wedding by Ryan Brenheiser, a good friend of mine. He actually was one of my inspirations of getting into this. Was he always said, make sure you have a good accountant. And that was one of the biggest, he said it and it was like gold to me. I was like, okay, when I start the business, I need a good accountant. And you actually interviewed my accountant, Mike Clipper.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, this past July, I believe. Yeah, he's been such an important and huge part of my business.
Yeah.
Phenomenal guy. But that would be the biggest thing I would say is just get a good accountant, because that's the last thing you want to be dealing with is dealing with anything with the government or IRS, and just making sure everything's in line and all your numbers are lining up and making sure that you're profitable and successful is a big thing. And I guess it's kind of like a 2-part question. The other thing that I learned on my own was always ask questions, make sure you listen, observe, and learn to try new things and fail at them and then try again and fail. I feel like it's the only way that I learn. And I feel that's a big thing. In our industry, we're lucky where a lot of people do share willingly. And, I just feel like it's a really good community where we're able to ask those questions and we have so much content available that people are just willing to share and help others out. So I think that's a big thing as well.
Yeah. And so these are 2 great points. I'll go back to your first about Michael. We actually had Michael Clipper back on the podcast in episode 153. You're right, in July 2nd specifically. And we can link to that in the show notes for those of you listening in. By the way, if you're new to the podcast, do know that Haley, who helps produce the podcast, is creating a wonderful resource at bokehpodcast.com. There are show notes that go with each of these episodes that we're putting out, links to websites that we've noted or social media, books, etc. So make sure you go check that out. But we'll link to episode 153 in the show notes with Michael Clipper. I've said on the podcast multiple times before, that was my biggest weakness, managing finances effectively as a photographer. And honestly, and sadly, it took me quite a while to learn that lesson. But there's nothing, in some ways, almost nothing more empowering than proactively handling your finances in such a way that you can then look at that data and make intelligent, proactive decisions for your business because you have it right there in front of you. Yes, you want to make sure you get your taxes done on time, and that's important. And for that matter, having your numbers in order for the IRS. I've been audited a couple of times, and my life was made so much easier in those instances because I'm a very detailed record keeper. But regardless, it goes beyond just taxes. It's about being an intelligent business owner and being able to pull those numbers up, look at a profit and loss statement, see where money is going, how you could make more money. It's really, really important. And an accountant can make a big, big difference in that effort and that process. So that's really important. And then you're right. I mean, we were talking about content earlier, but of course, the wonderful thing about social media, or one of the wonderful things about social media these days, is that we have so much access to so many people who do have more experience than we do. And whether it's encouragement or a piece of advice, we can go there and we can ask for it. And I think that's a good reminder as well. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's move on to the next question, though. And this is another kind of quick answer, if you will. But what is your photography business's brand position, or just as a definition for those not familiar with the concept, what is the unique selling point of your photography business versus those in your market?
It's very tough to kind of put words into, how I differentiate myself, because there's so many different aspects that I just try to be different. The overall experience, from the moment we meet until when we finalize the album. But as far as kind of a couple words, I would say documenting genuine moments creatively is something that really just sums a lot of it up. Just focusing on moments throughout the day and trying to get unique perspectives of them and just creating an overall enjoyable experience for my clients. From the very beginning until the end, there's a whole system. Once they book me, the bride and the groom, they get all these different tips and, different posts and informational resources. Like every month we'll get an email from me saying, hey, here's some great things to think about when planning for the engagement session. When the wedding's done, here's some ways that you can start thinking about the album and 5 ways to save time on your wedding day that you may not have thought about. There's so many different articles that I've written up just to keep the communication open with my couples, to let them know that I'm there. If they want to have that open conversation with me, hey, you sent this to me, I don't quite understand how this works. Can you explain it? Or, I just want to be there for them through the entire process. So yeah, it's the overall experience, but, specifically on the wedding day, and what I'm all about is just focusing on those moments, the ones that they're involved in or the ones that they may not see on the wedding day. So, well,
and I like the focus on adding value to your clients before too. There is so much significance to that idea when we're creating a positive experience. And I've said this multiple times over at this point, but there's a tendency, or has been a tendency anyway, in our industry in years past, for photographers to put so much importance on themselves as this artist coming to the wedding. We'll use wedding in this context since you're a wedding photographer. Right. And kind of lose sight of the reality, which is that they're there to do a job, number one, but then I think maybe even more importantly, because doing a job kind of sounds, I don't know, it sounds robotic and right. almost negative in a sense, but you're there to serve that client, to take care of that client. And so I think we should think more about how we can effectively do that throughout the process, not just there when we're photographing, but as you're describing, creating these pieces of content that are helpful for the client. I think it's really great. You mentioned creative approach to documenting their day, and I'm actually on your Instagram account right now. And for those of you listening in, you can check it out. It's Joe, just like it sounds, Dantone, DANTONE _photography, and we'll link to it in the show notes as well. But the wide variety of photography on your account, honestly, is really impressive. Like, for all this conversation about creating curated Instagram feeds and everything is, color coordinated and perfectly aligned and everything, I love the extremely wide variety of content or ultimately photography that you're creating. It is very creative. So major props to you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's one thing I've always kind of, with the Instagram feed, I just post and post. I don't necessarily try to color coordinate things or anything like that. I just want to get the content out there and, share it with other people. And, while I don't, put a huge focus on portraits, that is a big part of the wedding day too. So I like to post those types of things. Yeah. It's not all about moments and things like that. So, when I get couples that come to me, they used to ask me, they were like, hey, do you do family pictures when you do weddings? And I'm like, of course I do. And then I'm looking back and I'm like, I don't show any of that stuff. I need to show that,
yep.
Bridal party pictures. I never showed bridal party pictures. And now I'm doing that as well. So people understand, that is something that I do too. So yeah.
That's great. I really, truly am impressed, not only by the variety, but the quality of, the way that you're using lighting in some of these images is really wonderful as well. So for those of you listening in, make sure you go check out Joe Dantone _photography on Instagram. And again, we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Shifting gears here a little bit, what's one of the most unusual pieces of gear in your camera bag?
Oh, man. So I've been trying to travel lighter and lighter and lighter, and it just doesn't seem to work. I just keep adding stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd say about 3 years ago, I wanted to come up with something or find a piece of gear where I could fit it in my pocket, where I can clamp a flash to something. And the larger clamps, like the Justin clamps, they're way too big and bulky. I can't fit it in my pocket. So I went to a store that's local to me, Allen's Camera, and I sat there with the owner and I'm like, I have to figure something out. And we came up with this thing I call the Frankenstein. And what it is, it's a Manfred nano clamp.
Yes.
So it's really mini micro nano clamp.
Okay.
And then I put a quarter thread to quarter thread stud in the top of it. And then I screwed a Photox ball head cold shoe on top of that. So then when you loosen everything, obviously me being a mechanic or a technician, like we kind of fumbled this thing together. And so when you loosen it all up and collapse it, you could actually fit like 3 of them in your pocket, and you don't have to have anything else with you to clamp onto anything. You can clamp onto, the edges of tables, chairs, any lamp posts, anything like that, anything that's in the venue that you won't damage, of course. But yeah, so this is you can mount a flash on this, and it's sturdy enough where it'll hold up. I'll use force to pull on it, and it won't give. So I'd say that's pretty much the most unusual piece of gear I have, because it's 3 different brands kind of molded into this one thing I call the Frankenstein, and that's about it.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm a pretty big fan of Manfredo's clamps. More specifically, they have one called a spring. I'm actually on their website looking right now. They call it a spring clamp with flash shoe, and that's one that I used for probably years as a wedding photographer as well, because it did give me a lot of flexibility. It was something I could actually clamp onto the handle of my bag, but then I could unclamp it and slide a flash on there, and it has rubber feet on it as well. So I could just rest it on the top of something like the DJ's speaker, or I could go clamp it onto something as you're describing. And now I've got this off-camera flash, and oh my word, it was one of the best tools that we were able to use. But you're talking about, you said it's called a nano clamp?
Yeah, it's a nano clamp. So it's the really small clamp. It's got like it's like a jaw.
Okay.
And when you open it up, you can actually clamp onto whatever you need to clamp onto. It opens pretty wide. And if you want to stand it on something, if there's nothing to clamp onto, you can actually adjust the ball head where this clamp becomes the base. And you could sit a flash right there, like you said, on a DJ speakers or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And it'll be solid enough where that flash can stand there, and it's totally fine. So yeah, I use this all the time, especially for my second shooters when they want to clamp onto my light stand.
Okay.
And use my exact lighting setup for the reception so the images look consistent. I'll just throw one of these clamps onto my light stand right by my flash, and they'll further flash right on top of it.
Now, forgive me, did you mention that you had to buy a separate like cold shoe to stick on that clamp, or does it come with?
Yeah, so Fotix makes a cold shoe. I can get the part numbers and stuff for you.
That'd be cool, yeah. And maybe you get that to Haley. We'll put that in the show notes for those of you listening in, because I think this is great. I am seeing, I think the one that you're referring to, it is called the Nano Clamp on the Manfredo site too. We'll link to that and any potential accessories in the show notes. But I really appreciate you sharing that. That's great. There is something about being able to, I mean, at the end of the day, gear is fun. And so I get it. Like, it's hard to cut it down, but there's something about using a small piece of gear that can make such a big difference. And this is a great example. We'll link to that. We'll link to the spring clamp that I mentioned as well in the show notes, and you can check those out at bokehpodcast.com. Let's talk a little bit about marketing, and more specifically, marketing as it relates to wedding photographers and venues. This is something that we haven't really dug into in a lot of detail, and it was something that you'd suggested we could chat about for the podcast today. Did you figure this out, the significance of these relationships right away, or was it something that you kind of learned as you went? Give us a little bit of a backstory.
So when I first got into weddings, I always like to say I kind of got here by accident, because a friend of mine asked me to shoot a wedding. I was a gearhead, and I was like, dude, my hands are full of grease. I don't shoot weddings, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I did the wedding with him and fell in love with it. So from there on, I always had a really big interest in marketing and trying to do things a lot differently than others. And whether it was good marketing or bad marketing, like I'll share right now, I used to sit in Barnes & Noble and kind of edit the pictures that, I took for the weekend prior. And I was sitting there and I'm like, how can I target brides? I don't have the money right now to spend on, the advertising places and all that kind of stuff. How can I directly advertise to these people? Like, I just don't know how to do it. I'm trying to think of these ways. I always had business cards with me. I'm looking right ahead of me. And I mean, this is pretty bad, but I saw the bridal section in Barnes & Noble. And I was like, let me just go over there. Maybe I'll find some inspiration over there. Let me just cut through some of these books and just look through and see if I can figure anything out.
Yeah.
And then I saw these bridal binders with business card holders in them. So I was like, oh my God, am I going to do this? So I literally put business cards inside those bridal binders.
That's hilarious.
And I'm like, they're going right to the hands of these brides.
Yeah.
Like, I let's see if it works. And I booked a wedding from it.
Did you really? That's awesome.
So I put in like 10 binders and I actually booked a wedding from it. But so that was kind of like the start of me trying to figure out different ways to do things. I kind of figured out, with a lot of trial and error, the first place that a lot of these couples go to is the venue. And I feel like if they're at their venue and a salesperson there says, hey, we work with this person, or we really enjoy having this person here, go check them out. You already have 50% of that couple's trust built into you, because they trust their venue, they've booked with them, and there's that much more trust that they have in you. I mean, it's, they come to you, they say, hey, you're recommended by so-and-so.
Yeah.
So I figured that would be a good way to kind of get my foot in the door and start booking at these different venues. So what I did was at that point in time, I had shot quite a few weddings, local area. And I put together these little tins that I got at like the local craft store. And I put this fake grass in there. And I had little thumb drives that I specifically from that venue, a wedding that I shot there, I put all the images that I wanted to be shown on this thumb drive.
Okay.
And in there, I wrote a little thank you note to the venue saying I really appreciated, how you guys treated me here. I really enjoyed working with you guys, this, that, and the other. And please enjoy this coffee on me. And I had a Starbucks card in there,
That's
like a $5
cool.
Starbucks card. So I physically walked it into each one of these venues because I wanted to look at the space where they do the sales. There was a whole process that I had thought of. And, I wanted to see if there was any real estate on the walls in there, if they put any canvases up, if, where they put their albums, things like that. So walking in there and having that personal connection with the marketing coordinator or the salespeople that are there, that was half the battle. The other half was really going in the space and seeing what it's like for a couple to go in and sit in there and what they're presented with. So, later on, I figured out, hey, I'm going into these venues, showing my name, showing my face and, letting them know that I'm there. I see that they have blank walls and they have a really crowded area with a ton of small albums. And if I bring a huge album in there, it's going to go right on the coffee table where the couples sit when they're waiting to go into the sales room. So that was really the start of everything. So once I figured out that these venues really enjoyed getting these pictures and enjoyed working with a photographer that was willing to work with them, I found I was getting a lot of good feedback from them as well as a lot of referrals from them. I remember the first venue that I actually did work with, one of the women that works there as a salesperson, she left and went to another venue, which was a little bit more high end. And she still referred me over what they had on the referral list. So building those connections with people and just, having those relationships with a lot of people in these venues helps out immensely. It's a great thing to try and do, is just build these relationships with them.
Well, and I talk a lot about the significance of the relationship with a wedding coordinator, but the reality is that wedding clients or potential wedding clients many times are going to the location first, correct?
Right.
Yeah. So, it's interesting to consider that maybe even more valuable in some cases than relationships with wedding coordinators would be the venue, the first place that they go, while they're most excited maybe, and this idea of getting married is fresh on their mind. And then they get the opportunity to either hear about you or see your work, or maybe a combination of both might be really compelling. I was going to ask you too, why put the images on a physical drive versus just sending a gallery, but you answered that. And of course, remind me and all of us of the significance of that in-person connection again, right. Going and taking a physical gift. And it's funny how something as simple, if somebody gave me a $5 Starbucks card, how meaningful that would feel. I think it's kind of hilarious to think about, but you didn't have to spend a ton of money there. It was just a matter of a thumb drive and a Starbucks card, and somebody thought of me, and I get to go have a drink on them now. Something as simple as that can make a really significant impact. And then of course there's that in-person connection. So I love the combination of all of those things. One of the, of course, important things that we have to keep in mind as business owners, especially when it comes to marketing, is that we really can't throw all our eggs in one basket, right? So There are different ways to go about marketing. We've talked about the significance of the wedding coordinator, in this case, the venue, social media marketing, referrals from other clients, and the list may go on. But I'm curious, if you don't mind sharing, roughly what percentage of your business comes from relationships with venues versus those other sources?
So I do, at this point in time, like I said, coming into my 6th year, I'm building a good word of mouth with a lot of other couples that I've worked with. Yeah. But, when people do come in contact with me, contact me through my website, they're asked, where the referral came from. And I'm looking right now and just a rough estimate, just within the past 12 months, I've had a little over 80 leads just from venues.
Oh my goodness. Wow. You were saying that also hesitantly, and I was not expecting that big a number. That's incredible. How many weddings do you shoot in a year usually?
So I actually limit that down a lot now because, now I have the family and everything like that. I'm a one-man band over here. So I did get upwards of about 38 weddings in a year. That was the most, and that was to the point of overwhelming for me.
100%.
But now I'm pretty much hovering around the 24 to 28 range.
Nice.
Just being very specific about, what I know about the couple's expectations of what they want for their wedding day and, how I approach the weddings and just making sure we're a good fit and everything kind of jives together. So I'm able to kind of get that down and right in that zone for me.
That's really great. And by the way, I know I shot as many as 40 weddings in a year, and that is a really large number. And you start realizing the majority of the weekends in a year you're shooting, and it's not your typical 8-hour office workday. You're out moving around and working really hard. And then of course everything else that goes into working with just that one client before and after the wedding. It is a lot to manage. So kudos to you for really narrowing it down and focusing in. But my goodness, 80 leads from venues. That's huge.
The past 12 months. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, so let's make it really practical for our listeners, really tangible. What are some key ways that wedding photographers listening in can more effectively develop relationships with venues for the sake of these leads and the potential of growing their business?
So I first have to say, I understand, a lot of times when I first got into this, that a lot of photographers and vendors and everything like that always had problems with maitre d's and the venues because they're like, oh, they want us to do this, oh, they want us to do that, and we can't be here, we can't be there. I just kind of embraced it at a certain point and said, not only does the venue have to deal with managing all of their couple's expectations, they also have to coordinate the catering. They also have to coordinate all the vendors and make sure everything's going good with them. They have a lot on their plate. And if I'm a vendor that they enjoy working with and I'm smooth and able to help them out through the day, the day is going to go a lot easier for me because they understand me, they know me, and now we have that connection together. So I guess
I have to jump in here, Joe, and just commend you for that attitude, because again, there is a significant difference that I think that attitude can make, and not only the quality of your personal life and your stress levels, but then ultimately how other businesses, in this case venues, might see you. Because I know I've been frustrated at certain scenarios at particular venues in the past because of what seems like ridiculous rules. But rather than fighting it, if you're just like, this is the situation, how can I best work with it? That's a way more positive, certainly, and proactive attitude to have. So I think that's great.
Right. And I noticed that a lot of times when you just kind of shut your mouth and you just go and do whatever they need you to do. If you come back there and they remember you, they almost give you more leeway than they would with any other vendor. So, I mean, just being able to work with them is a big thing. And it kind of opens their eyes to, hey, who was that guy that we worked with, But I would say the first thing, the biggest thing that I do with venues and trying to get my name out there and get them to remember me is I have a system set up where right after the wedding is done, I always usually try and get a business card of one of the coordinators. And I send them an email the day after saying, hey, it was great working with you guys. I'm working on the couple's images. Once everything is finished, I'll send you the gallery. You guys can favorite whatever images you want, and I'll send them right over to you guys. Again, I appreciate you guys treating me like a guest. Your staff was great to work with. Boom. And I send that out to them, and they're like, who's this guy? Especially if I've never worked with them before. So once the gallery is done, I send it out to them. And, back with, I don't know if this really ties into brand positioning, but, there are certain places that you really enjoy working and they kind of fit your brand a little bit better.
Sure.
And there are places that are a little bit more high end, which may be that kind of clientele that you're trying to attract or, whatever it may be. So, this is kind of a cool thing where you can kind of control the places that you really enjoy working and where you want to do more business from. So if you do like that venue, you can really start to build relationships with people there. So now you start getting that clientele that wants that specific look from that venue, whether it be a mansion or a ballroom or, a barn. You can start working with those people that work there and start getting that clientele that has interest in that. So I think a big thing, one is, just making them known that you're there. And I guess the second way is showing up in person, getting to have that FaceTime with whether it be the marketing director or the salespeople that work there, sometimes getting through past the receptionist is a little difficult. But if you call ahead of time and you're like, hey, I'm a local photographer, I've worked at the venue a few times, I just want to link up with the marketing director or whoever controls your social media and just have a little conversation, chat about it. And more times than not, they'll set something up, and whether it be 5-10 minutes or whatever it may be, you can still lay eyes on where everything is in that room. If there's canvases on the wall, albums, this, that, and the other. So kind of gives you a good lay of the land. So I guess, like I said, let them know you enjoy working there. But once you're to the point where you're in this venue and, these people enjoy working with you, I just like to let them know that it's appreciated, them sending me the work, so I'll go there and I'll bring like the marketing coordinator or a salesperson, whoever I deal directly with. I've gone to the venues and given them like a bottle of champagne, at the end of the year, saying, thanks a lot.
I'd like you too.
Yeah, this is appreciated. Like, I really appreciate you guys, always thinking of me first, and, being able to do that. I bought one venue, their entire staff, I bought them all lunch one day. I just had it sent to their office out of nowhere.
That's cool.
They weren't expecting it. So, but from there, I actually own a commercial brand as well, a whole separate commercial business. And these venues will actually contact me to get me to do their catering, food shoots, and their headshots and all that kind of stuff, so it works for me for both brands. And actually just recently, one of the venues that I work with, they messaged me and they're like, hey, we're doing a reoccurring Instagram ad on Instagram. We're going to probably run it for the entire year. Is it okay if we use one of your images? And I was just like, yeah, I mean, if it's okay, if you can put my watermark on the bottom portion of the image. And they're like, oh, definitely. So now I have an Instagram ad that they've pumped a ton of money into that's floating around for their venue that has my name on the picture.
Nice.
So, I mean, that's advertising money that I'm not even spending just because I have these relationships with all these different venues.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it works a lot more ways than just getting the referral directly from them. They spread me out as well, with their advertising too. So, and
you mentioned your commercial work, and I just have to throw this in really quickly. Yeah. You do have separate Instagram accounts, which I think is great. I think there's something to be said for creating distinction between brands. And so Instagram, Dantone Creative, DANTONE _creative. And then you also have a family Instagram or family's Instagram account for your portrait work, which is JDP Families. And we'll link to both of these in the show notes as well, but I had to just throw that out there.
Yeah. I kind of, and it's funny, Mike Clipper, my accountant, like I said, he helps me out in many more ways than one. And he's like, you need to pretty much take your wedding business and show your clients that you're with them there from the beginning of the relationship, as a married couple or as an engaged couple, and have them follow you through them building their family. And it was business that I never really thought about it. Family work is very reoccurring, where weddings, they happen once.
Right.
And that's actually helped my business a lot. But I believe with the commercial aspect and my wedding business, I really had to separate it, because when you deal with the bigger commercial clients and you send them to a website that's very wedding forward, they're like, no go. Like, we're not, we need somebody that's commercial. Yeah. So that's why I separated the two. But yeah, just knowing these venues and trying to leverage that to build my commercial brand as well has worked for me too. And, I'll go in there and be like, hey, you guys need headshots, or I do food photography, I'd love to shoot, the catering, menu, whatever it may be. And, I've been hired to do that multiple times. So.
That's great. Well, and I understand the significance too, of specializing in one particular thing, but you're right that there's an opportunity there as a photographer to be able to leverage your skills. I think wedding photographers, like a good wedding photographer, is one of the most talented photographers out there, because the reality is they're not just simply a wedding photojournalist, for example. They're also a landscape photographer, an architectural photographer. Right. They're a portrait photographer, and so there are ways to utilize those skills in kind of other environments or with other clients. And I like that you're taking advantage of that. That's really great. So
definitely.
Back to our conversation though, you're talking about, number one, the significance of following up with the venue, which again, it seems so simple, but the reality is that probably many photographers don't proactively reach out and communicate. They go there, they do a job, they leave, And if they don't go shoot at that venue again, there's likely not going to be any more conversation after the fact. So just somebody making that effort to reach out proactively after the fact is a great thing. The significance of FaceTime, showing up, engaging them. And then in addition to that, potentially giving them a thank you gift. And man, a surprise thank you gift is even better. So I think that's great. Anything else that you want to lend to this conversation about developing relationships with the venues?
Right. So a big thing with the thank you gift is, doing that after you've gotten the work and, after all of that, you've built the relationships, always showing that you're appreciative of anybody is just, it makes people feel good. And so I've learned that in the business working with people, why not translate that to other people that you work directly with in your industry? That'll help you grow your business. So, but I would say a big thing also is that going into these places and seeing their sales space is very big. There's a venue out by me. There's a couple of venues out by me or event groups that have multiple venues. And I wrote down, a pretty much a guideline, like something I needed to get into these venues and how I needed to get into them. And one of the venues, I walked in there and I saw that there was no space they had a bunch of space on their walls. So I had told I guess it was the social media person that got in contact with me about one of the weddings that I shot there. She was like, "Oh, we absolutely love this wedding. We're over the top about it. Let us know when you send the pictures." I'm like, "Great." I sent them the gallery, and the pictures that they favorited for me to send back to them, I took those images plus a lot of images that will help tell the story of the wedding day.
Yeah.
And I put it into an album without even telling them.
Wow.
But then I remembered in their sales room that they had some open space on the walls. So it wasn't a huge canvas, but I got a 20 by 30 inch canvas.
Nice.
A watermark on the bottom corner of one of like the hero shots of the day. I set up a time to meet up with the salesperson and, we met in one of their venues and I brought in the album. And I also was like trying to like finagle this canvas through the door while I'm holding the album and everything. She's like, "Oh my God, what is this?" And I flipped it around and she was just like, "Oh my God." She was just like, "This is amazing." And I was like, "Yeah, I figured, you guys didn't have anything on the walls and, this kind of goes with the coloring of the room and everything like that." And she's like, "Wow, you really thought about all that." I'm like, "Yeah, well, when I was in here, I saw you guys just didn't have anything up. So I figured this would be nice for the room and kind of add some character to it for you guys." So you can take this, you can put it up. If you don't want to put it up, that's fine with me. I just figured I'd gift it over to you guys.
That's awesome.
So things like that go a long way. And plus it's putting my brand on their venue. And I feel like that's a big thing. And, even with, a lot of these venues, they have other events other than weddings. Like they do bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, they do corporate events, a lot of those, so I'm being recommended to do a lot of different things at these wedding venues, not just weddings. So I think going into the space and evaluating what you can bring to the table for them and what you can put on the walls and, kind of make it your space too.
Yeah. Especially if there's an opportunity to. Because the reality is that in some cases, and I'm actually curious to get your take on this, there's something very, very significant to be said for physical product, whether it's prints or albums or a combination of the above. But I bet that some venues are getting, I don't know, maybe they're not. Are they getting overrun with physical product from other photographers where there's not space for yours? Like, how do you kind of finagle your way into that?
So funny you mentioned that. There is a wedding group or a venue group out here in Philadelphia that very big, very well known. And I've always tried to get in the door with them. And, it's just not me wanting to get in the door just for the sake of getting in the door because they own so many venues. When you go there as a vendor, you're treated like a guest. They have top-notch everything. Their venues are beautiful. They're right in the city. They're great places to work. So I really wanted to start working there more frequently. And it was just very difficult because I just don't know why, but it was just so difficult to get in with them. And finally I did. And it kind of broke open a lot of doors for me. And when I went in there to, show my face and talk to the marketing director in person, I noticed, I was like, "Hey, where do people put their albums in here? Like, where do you have the photographer's albums?" And she pointed over to this bureau and it was filled with albums. And I'm like, "Oh my God." I was like, this is crazy. How am I going to get my album in there? And I was like, "Well, is this where the couple sits to wait to get into the sales room?" And she goes, "Oh yeah, sometimes there'll be two couples out here." And I noticed there was a coffee table. That day, I went back home and I made a 16 by 12 rectangle album and I brought it to them about a month later. And I was just like, yeah, knowing that they weren't going to fit this on that bureau.
Ah.
And I went in there and I was like, hey, I made this album for you guys, but it doesn't look like there's much space left on the bureau. Okay if I leave this right on the coffee table here? And she goes, oh, yeah, that would be perfect. They can just flip it open right there. And next thing you know, my album is the forefront album right when these couples go to sit down.
Wow.
And they're probably not going to want to go for the albums that are on that bureau that are going to cause a domino effect when they pick them up. So, yeah, I just, just thinking different ways and trying to put my brand forward.
Yeah. That was the phrase that came to mind, actually. Think different. I mean, if you just make a little bit of an effort to take a step back outside the box and look at things from a different angle, sometimes there's wonderful opportunity to do something different that's going to make your brand stand out.
Right. And trying to break the normal is a big thing.
It's huge. It's huge. And it really is so easy. I was reminded of this, was it yesterday or day before? I was driving, and there's a tendency that human beings have to just kind of follow what other people are doing. And this is not any more true than at traffic lights where there are 2 turn lanes, and you see a line of cars down the one turn lane, and the secondary turn lane, there's maybe 1 or 2 or 3 cars there. Yep. Because everybody sees the cars in front of them and they just tend to follow rather than just making a split second effort mentally to consider the possibility that there might be a different way to go about this that would be a bit more efficient and look at that wide open turn lane. But I think it's a great metaphor for business that granted, you could pretty much say that everything has been done under the sun in photography, but the exception to that is that most people follow each other. They tend to do the same thing. So there is opportunity to do something which as a concept on its own isn't necessarily earth-shattering, but it's different than what most people are doing. And that can make a drastic impact in your business and the way that you're able to build your business. So that's a great reminder. And this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you making time, Joe, for the Bokeh Podcast today and sharing your perspective.
Definitely. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, yeah. Your energy is great. Your photography is beautiful. I love your passion for family, and all of these things are good inspiration for all of us. Can you just share one more time where everyone can find you online, your website and social media as well?
So my website is joedantone.com, and JoeDantone. Instagram, my handle is Joe Dantone _photography. And as well as Facebook, it's the same bit, facebook.com / Joe Dantone photography. And then I guess my commercial stuff is Dantone Creative on Instagram as well. And that's the same for the website is dantonecreative.com.
Perfect. Well, we will link to these in the show notes. And once again, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and setting an example for all of us making time for the Bokeh Podcast.
Definitely. Thank you so much. It was great being here.
Thanks so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast today. Will you let us know what you think by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or maybe in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast, maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My direct email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com.